The Italjet Dragster 125, an absolutely bonkers scooter, and a lot like the RS 125, I also had one of these when I was a teenager, and just like the RS 125, I had to have one in the collection again just to remember those good times. The year was 2005. I was now old enough to ride a 125cc scooter. Having been on my 50cc Peugeot Speedfight, I had a massive love for the twist and goes back in the day. And my good friend at the time, Alex, who I grew up with, said, look, I'll give you a hand going to pick one all the way up from Wales. Collected it. First ride out, disaster. It was a lemon, and I don't know whether that was because the bike hadn't been looked after. It didn't handle well at all. It felt absolutely terrifying, but what I can tell you is it was certainly quick, and in a straight line it was a rocket. But unfortunately it couldn't handle, and the amount of fuel and two-stroke oil it drank, I just couldn't do it on my apprenticeship budget. So the old girl had to go. But I did tell myself, like the RS 125, I'm sure I'll have one again at a later date. And that date is today. So we're going to need to rewind the clocks to how we actually got to picking up an Italjet Dragster 125. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is thanks to my friend Paul at PJME. And for those who have watched the RS 125 build, you'll know he has been an absolute legend in making that come to reality. Now, he said to me when I saw him down at BSB, I've actually got an Italjet Dragster 125, and I said, I could certainly be very interested. But the problem was, he is a good few hours away from me, so when he said that he was going to be visiting Newbury, which was about 45 minutes from me, and he could bring the scooter down, well, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to get this project underway. I was incredibly grateful that Paul had brought the scooter down to me, but as he was in the middle of picking up some new machinery, unfortunately I didn't have the opportunity to take him out for a coffee and breakfast to say thanks for bringing the bike down. But I will have to go and see him at some point, and we're going to go and hopefully check out PJME's workshop. I've also got to say a big thanks to my bosses for letting me take the work van to collect the scooter. This would not have been a fun ride down the M4 on a vehicle that hadn't been started for many years. Safely back home, it was finally time to begin the tinkering, and I'm going to be honest, I was excited about this. It's been years since I've worked on a scooter, especially the CVT gearbox style, so I was certainly intrigued to see how much I remembered from when I last took one apart as a spotty teenager. So this little Italjet Dragster has been laid up for a few years, and before we get too carried away, I actually want to see if it at least starts or runs. So we need to get it up in the air, strip the carb out, and yeah, see if we can sing this little two-stroke to life. As the scooter had been sat for a couple of years, I knew I was going to need to take the carb apart and give it a clean out. And now for my younger subscribers and viewers to the channel who don't know what a carburetor is, think of it as like a fuel injection or an injector in a very basic term. Before we had that technology, carburetors were all the rage. But the problem with them is if you leave them for months and years on end, they block up and they just do not work. So unlike the injector where you can forget about it for a few years and normally get away with it, yeah, this doesn't work on a carburetor. So we are going to need to pull it apart, which I'll show you now. Carburetors are relatively simple to work on. You just need to take your time because it is easy to damage the soft brass components that are often found inside them. And as you can see here, when I remove the float bowl, it certainly doesn't look fantastic how that old fuel's gone off in there. The internals of the carb didn't look great, but they certainly weren't the worst I've ever seen. And what I'm going to stress here is I'm pretty sure we're not going to use this carb long term because it is quite small, but I do want to use it to test that the bike actually runs and starts before we get too carried away and restore it and find out we may have an electrical gremlin, or there may actually be a terminal problem with the engine. So for this step, I'm going to do what I would call a light refurbishment on the carb. And essentially this is where I'm going to take the jets out, and the jets are what control the fueling, so you can richen or lean the mixture off with these. But where they've been sat with old fuel in them, they do get blocked. And when they're blocked, you're going to struggle to get the bike to start or even ride at all. So I'm hoping just with some brake and clutch cleaner we can manage to move some of this gum away, get it all put back together, and that the gaskets hold up, because really when you strip a carb down you should change all the gaskets, but 9 times out of 10 you can get away with reusing the old ones. But if it leaks, obviously you're going to have fuel going everywhere. So certainly not ideal for your long term, but for this little test up and down the garden, it's going to be absolutely fine. Now unfortunately the old fuel wasn't completely removed with the brake cleaner, as you can see here, so I made the decision to fill the float bowl with some old 2-stroke unleaded that I'd had in a bottle left on the side, and fingers crossed if I left this overnight it might soften it up and then give it a scrub again in the morning. And as you can see here, it's definitely a lot better, but it's still not perfect. And again, as we're not going to keep this carb long term, it doesn't really matter as long as it works for the test purposes. Overall, I was pretty happy with the outcome of the mini refurbishment on the carb. I was hoping this was going to be clean enough now to get the bike to run. Now, I haven't actually tried to get it running, but looking at that float bowl, I'd be very surprised if it did start. But anyway, let's put it all back together, and then hopefully we have a successful job completed. To have a quick breakdown of the carb, it looks like, again, I haven't worked one of these before, that we've got an electronic choke, which I think ties in with this sensor. It just literally looks like it must be a temperature sensor. So when it's too cold, again, let me know in the comments, I believe it activates the automatic choke. We've got the fuel supply hose, and we've got, up there, the vacuum hose. And if you look on the tap, basically, when this has a vacuum, it opens up to let fuel into the carb, and the vacuum is caused when you start the bike. So I'm going to simulate quite dirtily by sucking on this, and this should open the fuel tap to let fuel into the float bowl. So have a look at the fuel, and I've got a little paint lid there. We'll just try and have a look what it comes out like. Okay, so the fuel that's come out doesn't smell terrible, but there is a lot of like dust, grit in there. Don't know if you can see that in the bottom. Yeah, we definitely don't want to start the bike and let that run through there. Not going to be good for that carb we've just cleaned out at all. So it's probably going to be the dummy tank. Refitting the carburetor is just essentially the reverse of the removal. Had to make a quick block for the carb for the vacuum feed off the fuel tank, otherwise fuel was going to go everywhere when we started it. And then with everything refitted, the only final step was just to make sure that the carb slide was working correctly, because you definitely don't run it running off wild. At this stage I really wasn't sure what the air filter was like, but I certainly didn't want to fire the bike up without the induction elbow on. Because of the rear wheel location, it could easily flick something up into the carb, ingest it into the engine, and game over. So what we now needed to do with the elbow back on was get the dummy fuel tank out. And as mentioned, I'm not sure what's in the main fuel tank on the scooter, but it didn't look great. And the dummy fuel tank essentially can just be strapped to the side just for testing purposes. I certainly wouldn't recommend going out for a ride like this on the road or anything. And for this test, I am going to run some pre-mixed 2-stroke oil. And the reason for it is I don't know what's in the 2-stroke tank on the scooter, and I don't really know if it's working. So again, this just ensures that we're not going to seize anything from the quick run down the garden. The only negative is it probably is going to smoke quite a bit, and it may struggle to actually clear itself. But for the peace of mind that we're not damaging anything, I'm going to go with it. With the bike lower back down, the only final check I wanted to do was to see if it had any coolant in the bike. Because again, if we've got no coolant in there or there's been a leak in a radiator, we're just going to do more damage. And as you can probably see here, yes, there's fluid in it. Oh boy, it does not look good. So I'm looking forward afterwards to getting this all flushed out, because it can't be doing the internals of the engine any good at all. Lead acid batteries do not do well with being left off a trickle charger, and unfortunately this one was dead, so the trusty RS125 battery was coming out to assist. It's alive and running, so it's time to get a crash helmet on and go and do the road test. Now, as you regulars will know, I was part of the Next affiliate scheme, and unfortunately, for some absolute unknown reason, they've removed me from it. So the link, unfortunately, is no longer in the videos, and I don't officially know why I'm not part of the scheme anymore, but that's a story for another day. Let's go and road test the Dragster. So ladies and gentlemen, it's alive, she lives, and to be honest with you, started almost a little bit too easy considering the state of that carb and that I hadn't got it absolutely perfect. Mechanically, it sounds pretty much there. It's definitely not running 100%. I don't know whether it just needs a good thrashing, a good Italian tune-up just flat out to clear it, but I'm not confident to put it on the road because we have got a lot of things to do and it almost seems pointless doing them with the rest of the bike being in such a way. So let's go through what I've discovered is wrong with the bike before even stripping it down. The suspension on the Italjet Dragster for a scooter is certainly very cool. Inbound damper here, but unfortunately, I mean, I can't imagine they were fantastic brand new because it is a bit of a, maybe a gimmick, but this one is not in a good way at all. And as cool as it looks, I think the fluid's completely gone because essentially it is literally a pogo stick when you're moving it and riding it. Borderline deadly. Something is definitely very wrong in the center stand. I mean, some sort of bush, maybe a bolt's just loose, but I think just given the age of it, it is probably going to be a bush. I haven't had a good look at it yet, but certainly I wouldn't want to park it next to anything very valuable, so we definitely need to look at that as well. The pillion seat lock is also not looking great either. Looks like we've got a bit of breakage here, something's missing on the back, some DIY tabs there, maybe that is original, I don't know, but not end of the world. I'd like to put a solo pod on there like a seat cover. I'm never having a pillion on it, but yeah, another thing again, you couldn't go out on the road because you'd lose that. This has obviously gone brittle as well as I've taken it off. Looks like one of the clips is broken, probably another part you can never source. We've also got no working front brakes. Lever goes completely back to the grip. Yeah, certainly going to need to investigate that. But it could be a lot like when we did Project RSV, that it literally just needs new fluid and bleeding. The rear thankfully does seem to work, as you saw me flying down the footpath there. Probably not my best idea in the wet on old tyres. But yeah, fingers crossed, nothing too mad hopefully. But what if we did the hell upgrades like we've done to so many of the other bikes? The master cylinder and calipers on this would just look, oh, that'd be cool. The steering gaiter is also completely perished. Now, when I did speak to Paul briefly when he dropped it off, he thinks this might be off of some Peugeot model car. So yeah, we need to investigate that and obviously see what damage is actually inside there, because that's potentially been open to the elements and may all need servicing and replacing as well. From a distance, it certainly doesn't look too bad, but every panel has got a mark, a chip, a scratch, paint flaking. I mean, the front wheel here doesn't look too bad, but oh boy, the rear does not look clever at all. And again, the rear damage. We've obviously got that seat lock that's not working, more damage. So the bike is going to need, obviously towards the end of the build, not at this stage, a full respray. Arguably the worst upgrade to this bike, or upgrade we'll say loosely, modification, these grips. I mean, oh, they are awful. Who thought that was a good idea? Even just sitting on it takes me right back to my youth. I don't remember them being this small, to be fair, but obviously the bikes have got bigger that you ride as you get older, and even sitting like this, it feels a bit, not 100% natural, but oh yes. The scooter race position. The real party piece of the Italjet Dragster, this engine, the 125cc 2-stroke. It can also be found in the Gilera Runner. I think it's the 125 SP. That's testing my knowledge now, back from years ago when I was really into these. And essentially for the car guys who watch this channel, this in the scooter world is like the Choose AZ. It is a tunable powerhouse. Obviously it ain't gonna make 1,000 horsepower, but back in the day, these things were making big numbers, and I had a quick sneak peek online to see if things have evolved since then, and it looks like people are getting like 30, 35 horsepower out of these, and they're 12, 13 stock, so really understated as standard. Plenty of upgrades, which we'll discuss right at the end on the plans for this build, but I certainly want to get this engine out, get it stripped down, see what it looks like, and then I would like to go down the tuning path, but I'll ask you guys at the end of the video about that. So the example I purchased here has got 7,737 kilometers on it, which is about 5,000 miles-ish. Certainly not high mileage, especially for a 2003 registered bike. And I do believe that mileage to be genuine because I checked the rear tyre, which still has a bit of tread in it, and it's dated 2003. So certainly a lot of miles, and yeah, let's see at the end of the video with the plans where we go with this, but with it being such low mileage, it almost seems a shame to do anything other than original restoration on it. But I'll leave you guys to decide that with the 3 options I'll present at the end. Now, Paul from PJME, although he owned this, he doesn't do a lot of work, or at least spare parts for the Italjet Dragster 125. And he has sent me a link through to italjet.co.uk, I think the website is. And they seem to produce a lot of parts for this. So I'm really hoping they'll be able to come to the rescue and we'll be able to get some bits for this. And again, if we go down the tuning path, it seems like the old tuner back in my scooter days, PM tuning is still about. So there is still a bit of a cult following for these. I would say they're sort of one of those ugly, pretty bikes, like you've got to love them and appreciate the angles. But I've got such fond memories of them when I was younger, especially seeing the PM tuning race bike. Oh, that was really cool. It was in like a blue and a yellow, it had the curly pipe on it, and oh, it was a thing of dreams at 16 years old. So yeah, hopefully we can still get a lot of the bits for this, because it's certainly going to need some TLC. Now, as much fun as tinkering in the garage all day with these projects is for me, the project does need to work for the views, and I'm going to ask you guys to let me know in the comments the 3 options that I'm weighing up at the moment. And again, if anyone's got any other ideas, let me know. Option 1, we go full strip down, go completely back to an original, as perfect as I can get it, bear in mind the part availability. So just a complete OEM refresh, make it look factory fresh. Just follow on the journey of doing that, wonderful. Option 2, we go with what I call an OEM plus build, which is where we strip it down, we get everything restored to where it's at a standard that it's presentable, looks lovely again, like option 1, but we tune it. We go with like modifications of how the dream spec at 16 would have left the factory. That's probably the option that I'm swaying towards at the moment, because for me, a 2-stroke being tuned, there's no better thing, especially a 2-stroke on song on the old pipe. I absolutely love it. And option 3, which is the complete and utter wild card, which is definitely going to upset the purists, is if it turns out that this is quite a nightmare to get all the bits to restore the bike, we buy a new shape Italjet Dragster 125, which I really like the look of. I don't like the fact that it's a 4-stroke. And we see if we can make that engine fit in there. So essentially we have the modern look of the new bike, but the coolness of the 2-stroke. That is certainly an appealing option, especially as this might be difficult to get hold of the parts, but it could also be quite sacrilege to completely rip this apart and be done with a lot of it. But yeah, let me know in the comments. I hope this series is going to be popular. The RS125 build certainly was. So yeah, if you haven't done so already, make sure you like, subscribe. Until the next one.